ground. What if I construct a theory of embeddedness itself from the theories of meaning given by, and just imagine, from Mimamsa philosophers of language and action, their theory of meaning and context and human action. Or if I think of context and meaning from 10th century rhetoricians like Kuntaka in Vakroti Jivitam, or on novelty itself through a reading of Dhvanyaloka. This may be too provocative for some of us, as the theoretic import of the conceptual frame and the conditions of its social production are worrisome for us. But let's enter into a contrast, where I propose that to think of newness in humanities in our context shall have at least three conditions. First, it begins with beginnings rather than the origins. It reaches out to the past to the extent it can, and hence believes that every attempt at looking back, that is making sense of the past, has full cognizance of the ground from which it begins. Secondly, as I mentioned in the very beginning, it's worldly in the sense that it's about the series of humanly intelligible meanings and its context. And thirdly, it's universal. And please don't misunderstand me in a postmodern, hyper-postmodern world if I'm using the word universal. In the sense that one can translate, and I'm using this word deliberately, it's universal, in the sense that one can translate and understand it in such a way that it becomes his or her own. It's intriguing to note that while the call to post-metaphysical thinking has stood as a big challenge in an actual world which is increasingly tightened through the promise of a networked freedom. I'm using networked freedom. The most potent metaphor, in my view, to look forward is the metaphor of the vernacular itself. Hamid Dabashi on Persian literary humanism, or David Shulman on a more than the real idea of imagination in pre-colonial India, seem to trace very diverse and rich carriers of the human or the humanities in non-Western traditions. The newness is sometimes, or most of the times, is recognition and elaboration, pratibhigyan or just khayal. Newness is in fact what else other than the estrangement and revelation, the flash of vision, the creative human vision. But indeed newness, for those of you who are thinking, I am shying away from its radical destruction and obliteration of the given. The very idea is that the new only happens when you radically destroy something or erase something or just dissolve something, obliterate what is given to you. But I'm not sure, as trained in history and on this very same campus, but significantly also in my very own way, that there are such possibilities. At least newness is not about a solitary point in cosmos, or the field of poetic vision or creative vision or theoretic labor. Apart from finding where we have landed up and what are our beginnings, and the now and the new is a constellation in which the human emerges every time, right? It erupts. It's the continued, labored act of reflection upon the constellation, what we call the human. Not like an apparition or a ghost, but a concrete, more than real act of imagination. And that's what is the human for me. I accepted this invitation to speak before you on such a huge and grand topic as the fate of humanities with great diffidence. What fascinates, as I mentioned, is the singular, the small, the specific. My education is such as a critical and intellectual historian. But the specific question of novelty, newness, the now, what is present to us and what are the ways in which we have thought about it has been with me for some time. I leave you with a suggestion given by a theorist of suggestion. We call him Dhvanikar, the theoretician of the theory of Dhvani or suggestion. Towards the end of his treatise on poetics, he raises the question about novelty in poetic meaning. It's possibly a beginning, at least to me, to think about novelty and its significance for humanities in our part of the world. There can be several such points, several such possibilities. We have never been modern. We have heard so many times, and possibly we never knew how to innovate is almost a truism now. Then what was our way in the world while thinking about the new, the now? The significance of the idea of verb, the grammatical verb, that is action, and shaping or crafting had peculiar meaning in certain traditions of thought. The thinker, the poet, is like a craftsman, gives shape to things. He or she is not an innovator, does not show much interest in this idea, at least in those traditions I am referring to. The suggestion on novelty is that creativity is about, and I am using this phrase, indefinite extension of poetic imagination. Kavi pratibha anantyam. Kavi pratibha ki anantata. I call it and I make it novel in my own way by calling it the indefinite labor, and I'm using the word labors advisedly, of the theoretic and imaginative conscience. I read out the translations of that particular verse where the indefinite extension of creative imagination is being talked about Kavi Pratibhana Anantyam, Kavi Pratibhaki Anantata. The Karika in the 4th section in Dhvanyaloka by Anandavardhana, the translation is like this. By this road of Dhvani and of subordinated suggestion, which has been shown, the imagination of poets can be indefinitely extended. And there is an alok and a commentary on that of this part of Dhvani and subordinated suggestion, which has been revealed, a further result is an infinite extension of the poet's imagination, pratibha, and then there is a huge exegesis on that. I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Okay. So I thought separate. Let me hand over to Achia Anzi, who's an artist and teaches here at JNU.
Everybody, yes. I'm a student of art, apart from teaching here Hebrew. So the question. Yeah. Now it's okay. Okay, so when I'm speaking the question of the new, it's not as if I'm dealing with the question of the new daily, but it's crucial also for my art practice. So I guess some of the reflections that I'm bringing here are connected to the way I see art, the purpose of art, how to look at art nowadays. I'm happy that you mentioned that it should not be like a concrete idea that I'm presenting, because it's more reflection, and I'm not really sure that the conclusions that I came with or what I think that I came with is actually solid, but it's a way of thinking. The relations that I would like to explore is the relation between the idea of the new, the notion of new, and meaning. And what I have in mind, of course, is on the one hand, an I recreate a certain opposition which should definitely be deconstructed, but we were speaking about the modernist engagement with aesthetics on one hand, with the obsession, I would say, with the new, and on the other hand, with the more conceptual approach that we have nowadays to art. And in a way, this is what I have in the back of my mind when I'm trying to think about the question of the new. The questions that we address here today is the question of the new. After a long centuries that celebrated the new and later condemned it, we wish to ponder into the meaning of the new. How to say something new about the new. How to speak of the new in a newly manner, provided that while speaking of the new, we must evaluate its importance. Speaking of the new is already a trap. If we accept that speaking differs from repeating, the new already sneaks into our speech. Otherwise, we will denounce speech as a mere repetition, or yet again, defend it in the name of a new meaning arising from it. The new sneaks into our speech even while questioning the new. The new sets speaking in motion. It enables speech as we know it. So even if we are trying to question or to try to rethink what is the new, the one thing that we obviously doing is trying to say something new about the new. So it's a trap in that way. The new marks the difference between repeating and speech. When I'm speaking about speech, I'm speaking about meaningful speech. Well, obviously, sitting here today and trying to say something meaningful is trying to bring a new meaning. So in that sense, speech is something which differs from repeating. The new is the ground of the possibility of speech, or at least speech as we know it. While speaking of the new today, we are forced to let our speech snitch. What do I mean by snitch? To snitch is to inform about a crime without denying one's participation in it. We snitch on the new without the possibility of denying our partaking in it. We are guilty of the new, and yet our confession does not set us free. Snitching is an exploration of the limitation of our discourse without the possibility of transcending this limitation. By snitching on speech, the snitch, speech itself, does not deny its complicity. Snitching is the only possibility of speaking about the ground of a certain discursive regime, in this case, the regime of the new. Speaking beyond the limitation of the regime is impossible. Questioning the new without admitting our participation in it is impossibility again. The limitation of speech should be unfolded, and yet the moment of unfolding itself is trapped in the discursive regime of the new. By speaking of the new, we are already preconceiving the new. We are already within the constraints of the new. In order to question the new, we have to hold an exterior position towards concept. When this position is impossible, we can only snitch. Should we accept the authority of the new? Can we establish a discourse which is free from the new? Do we understand the new? What do we expect when we construct a new phrase, be it lingual or visual, philosophical or artistic? What is the use of snitching if one cannot speak beyond the discourse? The answer is that by snitching, we set the new in motion. Only in motion can we discover the new. The new is making a way towards us, while allowing it to reveal itself in speech. Only by snitching, that is speaking of the new, by making a new statement about the new might arise. If I wish to make a new announcement about the new today, that is, not to repeat anything that has been said about the new until now, it is not for the sake of saying something new, but in order to create a meaningful event. The new is new only if it is meaningful. The new is not invited to speech or construct speech for its own sake. The new is bound to make speech meaningful. If one tries to say something new about the new, It is not for the sake of the new, but for the sake of meaning. On the contrary, if one wishes to dismiss speech as repetition, we already know that, this is already has been said, it is not because the old is meaningless, nor because only the new is meaningful, but because new and meaning form a mutual relation that enables speech. I think that's the main point. There is a certain relation between, I'm later going to elaborate, but there is a certain relation between new and meaning. The new never stands on its own, and in a way that's the problem with a certain notion of modernism in art, which I, as I said, elaborated. The new, as a mere difference, can be meaningless. On the other hand, repeating the same phrase to a different audience might yield a meaningful event. The new, in short, is never the sole measurement, nor the ultimate goal to be achieved. The new, or a difference, is part of the economy which produces meaningful events, whether discursive, cultural, artistic, or historical. Now, in the second part, I'm going to speak about Boris Groys, you quoted. His essay on the new, but at the center of his essay on the new in art, he speaks about the museum. So we will see it just now. In recent decades, we experienced a new approach